Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SavvyCast. This is Jamie, and I'm very thrilled that you're here today, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast. Today, I'm going to chat with you all about my latest obsession, and that is making sourdough bread. I literally have been taken over. I've been staying up later at night than I ever have. I've been popping up early, running to the kitchen to see if my starter is active and see if my bread has risen or my dough has proofed. So anyway, it's been a fun journey so far. I've been sharing the day-to-day on my Instagram, which if you're on Instagram and you're not following Family Savvy, please do, because that is where anything that's happening in real time, it's on there. I share a lot of my bread making and end results on my stories, and I'll start sharing more on my feed as I get things perfected, but the feed is a little more curated. Stories are just real life. So if you want to follow along in that regard, please check out my Instagram. But today I'm just going to share with you one of the two types. I'm going to do two separate podcasts on the different breads that I'm making. I have two different sourdough starters. One is the authentic, the one you only feed with water and flour. It makes its own yeast. It's wild yeast. The one I'm going to talk about today is what I call potato flake sourdough starter. Now, if any of you listening are my age and you grew up maybe going to church potlucks or picnics on the ground, or you had older relatives and you would have a big spread of food for the holidays or for picnics, you've probably seen or had a version of this bread. Okay, this is what it looks like. And I immediately put mine in the freezer if we're not going to eat it that day or the next day, because it freezes beautifully. But it looks just like a beautiful homemade loaf of bread, but it looks more like one big rectangular, almost like a yeast roll. It's got just a golden crust and it's the shape of a loaf pan. But this is potato flake sourdough bread. And let me first start by saying everything is based off of a starter that you maintain. You feed it, and people will say, oh, you must feed it 3 to 5 days a week. Some notes that you get from people will say once a week. I try to, at the minimum, feed mine and cook with it twice a week, but that's just because I do a lot of entertaining. We have our small group, so I always need bread. Last week, I think I did 3 different batches of this, so I was feeding it almost every day. But needless to say, you have to have the starter or make one. Now, I'm going to tell you how I got my starter. A friend of my daughter, Emma, who is at Auburn, about to graduate, her sweet friend Ann lives here in Birmingham, and the girls and all of we moms were having holiday lunch talking about sourdough, and I was sharing that my authentic sourdough experience was not going so great, that it was very frustrating. And Diane, who so graciously gave me the starter, she was at that lunch and she said, Jamie, I have a starter that's potato flake starter, and I promise you, you won't have any trouble with it. She said, let me get it ready and I will give you some. She texted me a few weeks later, had some starter for me, and I drove to Mountain Brook where they live, got it out of her mailbox because she had to go somewhere and I just told her to stick it in the mailbox. So I got it and I came home, and I want to show you what it looks like. And I'll describe it for my podcast peeps. This is the potato flake starter. Now, I fed this morning, so it's all the way to the top. But as you can see, it looks almost like milky water or watery milk. It's very liquidy. It's just a pale yellow. And I fed it this morning, and I don't know if you can see my YouTube peeps, but it's getting white, cloudy little bubbles at the top, and it smells very sour, which is a good thing. At the end of the day today, and I've got it in my oven on the proof setting. It's not really cool. It's not really warm. When it's in warmer weather, it will go active quicker, but in a few hours or tonight, this will have a big layer of bubbles on top, and it will be active, meaning it's ready to pour off a cup and use that cup of starter along with the other ingredients to make the potato flake sourdough bread. What I will do after I pour the cup off, and of course you can see there's a little separation here. You always stir it before you pour off what you're going to use to make your bread, but you don't have to feed it again and then put it back in the fridge. When you've taken your cup out, you just stick what's left back in the fridge and you leave it there until you know you want to make bread and you want to think ahead, because feeding means feed and wait 8 to 12 hours for it to become active, because once you stick it in the fridge for a few days, it's going to be dormant. You're going to have this starter in your fridge. And if you want to bake your bread on Sunday, you probably are going to want to Thursday night pull it out, feed it, let it sit out on the counter, and then the next morning you'll start the process. And you could even start that Friday or Saturday. There's some variables, but it's not something you're going to do all in one day. That leads me to one thing I want to say about the starter. There are recipes, because starter has to be started somewhere. But when I started sharing my potato flake escapades on Instagram, I immediately started having DMs. Oh my goodness, how do we make the starter? How do we make the starter? I messaged Diane, my friend, and said, hey, can you give me the starter recipe? She said, Jamie, I've never been able to make the starter and it turned out well. Tell people to try to find it from somebody who has been using it and feeding it for a while, and that it is an established starter. My first recommendation is, if you can find someone who already has a starter that's well maintained, get it from them. I found out, just because I post things and people will DM me, that one of Zane's and my dearest and oldest couple friends who live less than a mile away, he has been making the same bread actually a few months before I did. He's equally obsessed. He and I have been texting pictures, notes. He's been bringing me handouts. We've been just having the best time, but I wouldn't have known it had I not posted it. He saw it, and then he said, hey, Zane and Jamie, I'm doing bread too. So whether it's just asking around with friends or church or work or wherever, you are very likely to find somebody who has sourdough starter that they would love to share. Because if you're making bread with it, you are feeding it. You're either having to pour it off or make bread with it, because you can't overdo your container. So that's my first step. But I will share in the show notes a website that has a recipe for the starter. And I think that the key to it is that you make it, you get it started, and you let it go through several feedings before you actually use it to make bread. So I don't think that you would want to just make a starter, feed it once, and try to make bread. So regardless of how you get your starter, if you make it and nurture it, or if you get it from someone else, when you want to make bread, or whether you're making bread or not, you're going to need to consistently feed your starter to keep it alive. And the process of feeding this starter is super simple. This morning, I went to the fridge and there was half the amount of this in this jar, and I plan to make bread day after tomorrow. So I went ahead and fed this morning. You pull it out and you add 3 things. You add sugar, potato flakes, and warm water. That's how you feed it. And you stir it up, and you can leave it out on your counter. Some people say put it back in the fridge, and I did that in the beginning, but I don't anymore, because that just makes it take longer to become active. Cold makes any dough or yeast, it slows it down. It retards the fermentation, makes it go slowly. You feed this starter with water, potato flakes, and sugar. And then I usually put mine in my oven on the proof setting. And 8 to 12 hours is typical for when it will become active starter, ready to be used in the bread recipe to make bread. So to make the bread, and I will have the recipe on the show notes, I'm actually going to have an entire blog post that will be posted probably by the time this podcast is published that will share start to finish how to make this bread and 2 things that you can do with it. In addition to many things, you can Google many and get many other ideas, but these are just things that I'm loving. When your starter is active, you stir it up and you take out 1 cup to make bread. This bread is made in these loaf pans. Now, I am very particular about my loaf pans, whether I'm making this or banana bread or carrot cake bread, strawberry bread. I have a peach bread recipe. I have a lot of sweet bread recipes. And I learned the hard way that not every loaf pan is the same. I don't care how much baker's joy you spray on some of them, they are going to stick, they're going to cook unevenly, but I have found the perfect loaf pans, and I think I've bought 3 to 4 more since I've started making bread, but these are USA, second to none. And as you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, these are beautiful. They have they're heavy, they have the lines in them. They're just wonderful. One recipe made from 1 cup of this starter will make 3 loaves of bread. So you're getting a lot out of your 1 cup of starter. So basically, and I'm just going to talk you through this because I feel like it just helps to hear someone walk you through it or talk you through it, just where it will register for like a second or third time, and you're not doing everything the first time you're reading the recipe. So I poured off a cup of this starter that is now active. So now I'm going to mix the bread and I will share a recipe that if you want to make 2 loaves or 3, and it's a slight difference in how much starter, how much sugar, and so forth. But I always make 3 loaves, so I always do a cup of starter. If you only have 2 loaf pans and you want to make 2 loaves, you'll only do 2/3 cup of starter. But anyway, I'll share that. So for the bread, you've got your starter, you have got sugar, and every recipe that I have found says corn oil. I've never used corn oil. I have used vegetable oil, avocado oil, and expeller pressed sunflower oil. I have not been able to tell a difference in any of them. And of course, avocado is the healthiest. If you want the healthiest, do avocado. I'm not going to use olive because I don't think that would turn out well. I think you would taste it unless you used pure olive oil, which probably I may give that a try because I don't think you can taste pure. It's just not extra virgin. So you have your starter, sugar, oil, salt, and I use Redmond's real salt. I'm going to link to that as well. That is another thing that I've just recently discovered. And if you're watching on YouTube, look at this salt. You can see the minerals, and then there's like these sparkly things like diamonds, but this is mined in Utah. They retain all the minerals and nutrients. This salt is next level. My neighbor who also makes bread, when the bread is hot, we brush it with butter and sprinkle Redmond's real salt. Just get a little bit of it, or Maldon sea salt if you want that crunchy, but that's more of a finishing salt. The Redmond's is a salt that you would cook with, and this is what I put in my bread. And I will tell you, I ordered, I think it was like it was just like their basic package of, it's probably 2 cups, and it's not been a month and I'm already almost out, and I just ordered a 10-pound bag. And they also sell electrolytes that are like, if you want to stay hydrated, best electrolytes I've ever had. So I'll link to those, but all salts are not created equal, and salt is the most important seasoning of anything. I mean, if you had to just have one seasoning, I mean, even the Bible talks about salt and how if you don't have salt, there's no flavor. So Redmond's is wonderful because it has all the minerals. It's not been stripped. Iodized salt, you should throw it out unless you're cleaning your sink with it or doing something like cleaning with it, because there's no nutritional value at all. This, you're getting minerals. So that was my little aside. Okay, so now I'm going to go back and reiterate. Starter: sugar, oil, salt, warm water, and bread flour. Now, this is something I want to let you all know, and don't be confused by it, but just always know in your head, you feed with all purpose, you bake with bread. BB, bake with bread. Feed with all purpose. You don't feed your starter with bread flour, you feed it with all purpose flour. The only time you are going to pull out the bread flour, which is a different composition than all purpose, is when you are mixing up your dough to make bread. So that is an easy mistake that can be made, is to use the wrong flour. So just remember, when you're mixing up the bread, use your bread flour. So you put all that in a bowl and you are going to mix it into a stiff batter, roll it in oil, put it in a greased bowl, cover it, and let it sit overnight. Now, that's how I made it in the beginning. Now I am throwing that dough into my KitchenAid, and I am kneading it for about 1 minute in the KitchenAid. I just think it does a better job. And then I take it out and I knead it for about 30 more seconds. I'm doing more kneading than I was initially. I was initially just sort of stirring it with the dough hook and plopping it in there, and it's just not as good. You need to pay a little more time to kneading it, but you put it in the bowl for the first rise, which if you mix it up at night, the first rise will be overnight. If you do all this in the morning, then the first rise will be done that night. Once the first rise is over, the dough that you've covered and either put in your oven on the proof function or tried to put in the warmest spot of your house, you'll pull that towel back that's covering it or whatever, like plastic wrap, and the dough will have almost doubled in size. So at that point, you are going to punch it down. You're going to peel it out of the bowl, pour it out. I've got a marble island, so that is my workspace. I might add a little flour, but if you don't have like some sort of stone countertop, you'll just want a really good cutting board, large surface, and you're going to want to divide that dough. And in my case, because I'm making 3 loaves, into 3 as equal as possible pieces. And you're going to knead those about, oh goodness, what I do is I'll lift each piece that I've separated. And the first time I lift it up, it just sort of stretches and starts pulling down like it's just got a weight. And then I'll slap it down, fold it over, do a few more slap and folds or knead it. And then it starts getting tight, where if you hold it up, it's not going to be drooping. It's just going to be more compact. So you want to tighten your dough, knead it up, and make it where it's like as tight as possible ball. Shouldn't take you longer than 30 seconds to a minute. And then you want to put each ball into a greased loaf pan, what you're going to bake it in. Then you're going to put it in the proof oven or in a warm place. And I either cover each one with a dishcloth, a clean dishcloth. I just ordered some, and I'll link to them. I just ordered some elasticized linen covers that you can just put over these. I have heard you don't need to use plastic wrap, but I've used it before and I have not had a problem. So I'm not going to be adamant about that, but you do need to cover it. I will say this. I do think that whatever you cover it with, it does not need to be porous, meaning a lot of air doesn't need to be able to get through it. When I cover it with a dish towel, the dish towel is pretty compact. It will keep the moisture in enough where that the dough does not develop a skin, meaning it gets a little dry and develops a little bit of a skin that it isn't going to hurt anything, but it's just not optimal. So you want to make sure that you're covering it with something that will not let it dry out. Okay, so you've got your pans with the dough balls, put them where they're going to be. And whether it's the next night or the next morning, and then after those 12 hours or so, you will take off the cover and you will see beautifully expanded dough. Usually it goes, or mine at least have gone from a ball that doesn't even fill up the whole bottom to almost overflowing the sides, just big, beautiful loaves. Now here's where that are ready to bake. Now I want to tell you all, because it's so disappointing, and I've done it several times, be super careful when you're moving your risen dough. And honestly, it's better if you have a proof function on your oven to proof do the last rise in the pans in that oven, where you can just remove the cloth off the top and go ahead and bake them and not have to move the pans. Because if you bump them into something and they deflate, they're not going to inflate again, and they're not going to be as pretty. They will taste fabulous, but the looks won't be there. That mound, if you pierce it, the big dome that is, magazine worthy, it will be gone. Your bread will still be good, but it'll fall and be flat and just be sort of rectangular. Like the loaf I just showed you, mine had fallen. And it's not beautiful, it's just basic. But trust me, it's heavenly tasting. But anyway, just be careful with that second rise that's in the pan. Try not to move it or bump it. You just want to, again, it says, and this is what happened to that bread. It says a lot of these recipes to brush with butter. I'm going to venture to say I'm not going to brush it with butter before baking. I'm going to just spray it lightly with some avocado oil. And I usually will put a little bit of Redmond's. And then, because I brushed that loaf that I just showed you, and it was a big, beautiful dome. And when I brushed it, it fell. So what I'm doing now is just spraying a little avocado oil, salt or no salt, your preference. And then when the loaves are done, then I brush melted butter and I sprinkle Maldon salt, which is exquisite. Again, I had no idea what I was missing all my life with the Redmond's real salt and the Maldon's salt from England. It's mined somewhere near Sussex, England. This is gorgeous salt, guys. Look at this. It's beautiful. Big, beautiful flakes. And they're almost, okay, and look, if you move it, they're like diamonds. Maldon is a finishing salt. Redmond's Real is a fine salt. So the Redmond's Real is what I put in my bread, my dough, when mixing it up. It's what I use if I am boiling pasta. I put it in my pasta water. If I do vegetables and I'm putting salt and freshly ground pepper, I'm going to use the Redmond's Real. Redmond's also makes a kosher if you want a bigger flake, like on your roasted veggies. If I'm making soup, stew, anything where I would use a fine sea salt, or for lack of a better word, table salt, that's Redmond's. This Maldon are big, beautiful flakes. Look how big this one is, guys. Look, look at that. It's a perfect square that looks like a diamond almost. This is what you put on the bread after you brush it. It's baked. It's beautiful. You brush it with butter, and then you sprinkle this Maldon salt on top, and it's beautiful. And when you bite into the bread, if you bite into a piece of that, it's that crunch. Two totally different salts. Both are absolutely, for me, necessary and worth every penny. So I'll link to them. I want to end by telling you that this bread is life. It is the best bread. People are going crazy. People I've given it to, family and friends, are telling me I'll buy some because they feel guilty because I give it to them and then they want more, but they don't want to. So I'm sort of trying to figure out how to bless all of my people with this fabulous bread that takes time and effort, but without, I'm not going to charge my people, but I'm trying to inspire people like I'm doing this podcast to learn how to make it because it's so rewarding. It's wonderful to pull out 3 loaves of fabulous bread and serve one to your family, take one to a friend. And if there's anyone sick or that's had a new baby and I've got beautiful little packages that you put the loaves in if you gift them. They're like half parchment with like a little window, and you can get stickers. You can get actual plastic bags. They're not as pretty, but they're more utilitarian. There's so many ways you can use your skill of baking bread to bless others and to just bring joy. And this will be in the blog post. My friend Bobby, that is my neighbor, that's a few steps ahead of me, he brought me a recipe for a filling and an icing to use with the dough, this dough recipe. After the first big proof, instead of dividing it into 3 loaves to make bread, you pull it all out on your workspace. You roll it all out into one big sheet of dough, and you spread this cinnamon sugar filling. You roll it up. You let it proof as you would if it were in the bread pans. You let it proof, and then you bake it, do icing. I did that. Took it to small group last night. Small group, we have about 20 people. People were raving. So there's so much you can do. And I know, my friends, that it sounds like a lot. It sounds daunting, but I'm going to leave you with what I probably should have started with. But after listening, if you're like, this sounds like a lot, this sounds like it would be a lot of trouble or I couldn't do it. Like I said, I don't know if I mentioned, with my original sourdough or the authentic sourdough starter that I'm doing it as well, that takes time, effort, and patience. I tried it, quote unquote, for 2 or 3 days, and I'm like, this is for the birds, tossed it. A few months later, I was at church, and in the sermon, the pastor that happened to be speaking that day referenced someone. I do not recall who he was quoting, but he said, replace the word try with train. And that immediately struck a chord in my head. I said, I was so sad that I tried and failed sourdough, but I thought, you know what? Sourdough is not something you just try. You have to train to do sourdough. You have to train to do a whole lot of things in life that if you attach the word try, you may not end up doing it. Guys, if this is striking a chord, don't try it. Just decide, hey, I'm going to train to do this. And after I have learned how to do it and I know how to do it, if I want to maybe put it on hold, great, but don't not do this because you think it's too difficult, because once you've done it a few times, if you're like me, you'll be hooked. Okay, friends, I hope that this was helpful. I will link to the blog post, all the recipes, all the things. And if you are currently making this, if you've been making this for years, or if you want to try it, I would love to hear from you. I love hearing from all of you sweet friends. So always reach out to me, jamie@familysavvy.com. And until next time, you all have a fabulous rest of your day. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the SavvyCast. If you'll take the time to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, that would mean so much. As always, thank you for listening and have a blessed day.